What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by two of the best in the business. You know them, you love them. Chris Fedor, Jimmy Watkins. What's going on, fellas? How was your Memorial Day weekend?
Man, it was great. Spent time with the family, did a little grilling outdoors, went to the in-laws pool, and Elliot went swimming. So it was a really, really good time spent with family. And then yesterday, to extend the weekend a little bit, my dad came over and we had a good time with him. So we got both sides of the family and got a little bit of outdoors, a little bit of indoors. The weather could have been better the second day, but that's okay. It was nice to have that extended break.
I went on an unprecedented streak of not sleeping in my own bed. I was on PTO.
Whoa.
I was on PTO 2 weekends ago in Key West with some of my friends. Then I was dog sitting for my mother for the week that followed. Then I went out of town again for Memorial Day weekend. So I was happy to be home on Monday. I had a good Memorial Day weekend. I was also happy to be home.
I love how Chris's eyes got big. He's like, "Oh, hold on now. We need some clarification on that." Because
would be insane podcast fodder. Insane.
That would be a great way to start the show.
In my own bed. What does that imply? Hello.
That would be a great way to start the podcast, Jimmy. Throw us all off the rails. But we are recording this around halftime, a little bit early into the third quarter of Game 4 of the Western Conference Finals. And guys, it's been another slugfest. They were tied at halftime. They're going back and forth now. Anthony Edwards been actually putting up shots more so than he has during the rest of this series. Chris, what have you seen from these two teams? And I mean, we talked a lot about Kyrie Irving in the last podcast that came out yesterday. This will come out. Yeah, but I think the script writers are insane this season and thinking about how a potential Kyrie Irving Boston Celtics matchup in the NBA Finals could look. You talked about him saging the court. I thought it would be hilarious if we brought the sage back just for the series, if that so happens, because we know it's undone. I don't think anybody's done it. Come back from a 3-0 series lead in the NBA Finals, in the Eastern Conference or Western Conference Finals. So we are looking at something that could be done, whatever. But Chris, what have you seen from this series between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Dallas Mavericks?
I think experience has mattered a lot in this series. I think when you look at end-of-game situations, when you look at holding on to leads, when you look at trying to come from behind, a lot of that favors Dallas, right? Because Kyrie and Luka together, they're two of the best closers in the entire NBA, and they're on the same team. And they're just doing it at a higher level than Ant, and they're doing it at a higher level than Ant and Cat combined. So when your two best players are going to outplay consistently the two best players on the other side, it just demands so much more from the other guys. And there have been times where Minnesota has won the three-point battle significantly. There have been times where, Naz Reid has stepped up and played like the sixth man of the year that he was voted to be. But it just hasn't mattered because the stars have to play like stars, especially if the other stars are going to play like stars. And Karl Anthony Towns has not been good in the series against Dallas, even though it's a favorable matchup for him. And then Anthony Edwards has been up and down. Obviously, a lot of the Dallas focus on the defensive end of the floor is on Ant. And he's seeing a bunch of different coverages. They're trying to do everything that they can to make him uncomfortable. They're making him work when he's on the defensive end of the floor, which is pretty significant. He came into the series saying, hey, I'm a two-way player. Hey, I do more than just score the ball. I impact the game in a variety of ways. My matchup's going to be Kyrie. Okay, that's fine in theory, but number one, you don't want to tug on Superman's cape. And number two, you're going to run yourself into the ground. It is exhausting to use that kind of energy on the defensive end of the floor against that caliber player when you also have so much of the responsibility offensively. And Anthony Edwards early on in the series was getting oxygen in the back because it is high level basketball, extremely competitive, and the demands on him at both ends of the floor have just been a little bit too much based on, the fact that Cat hasn't played all that well, the fact that Rudy is, hit and miss when it comes to being an offensive threat. So I don't think there has been anything that surprising in this series to me. Maybe the fact that Dallas at the time of this recording is up 3-0 and Minnesota hasn't found a way to get at least one of these games. But defensively, the Timberwolves came into this series as the best defense in the NBA. That hasn't played itself out. And then offensively, they just haven't had enough help consistently for Anthony Edwards, especially with Luka and Kyrie playing at the level that they're playing at.
I would say I think people were sleeping a little bit on Dallas's defense heading into this series. I mean, we don't know exactly how it's going to wrap up. We might be making history here and being the first podcast to analyze a series during Game 3 of game or during the third quarter of Game 4 of a series. But to this point, I think Dallas's defense has been not just Dallas's defense is really good, particularly since they traded for PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford. Also, just the step up in competition that represented for Minnesota. I mean, the Phoenix Suns, Frank Vogel did his best to piece together that defense this season. Didn't get him anything. He's looking for a job now. He's on the Cavs list of coaching candidates. The Denver Nuggets were better this year on defense. I think they were fringe top 10. But their personnel is just not. Their personnel is not particularly Jokic as a rim protector and Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively as rim protectors. That's a huge difference for players like Ant and Jaden who like to attack the rim as much as they do. And I think everyone's beaten up too much on Rudy Gobert defensively right now. No one can guard Luka on a switch. It doesn't matter who you are. Luka's going to get that shot off that he hit the game winner. I think that was Game 2 against basically everybody. I do think, though, that Gobert is a little bit, no pun intended, not a little bit, he's so rudimentary, no pun intended, on offense that he allows guys like Gafford and Derek Lively to just patrol the rim without really having to worry about him punishing you that much. Or when Dallas sends traps at Ant and Gobert is the outlet guy, just not that he just moves awkwardly. He can't do a ton with the ball in his hands. It's a lob catch or nothing basically, and I think that's a real push-pull for Minnesota. You saw it in Game 3. They benched Gobert for a large chunk of the fourth quarter because they were trying to get more space out there for guys to try that. I think it was Nas and Cat out there. Cat also has just been awful. I mean,
yeah,
there's a huge referendum to be had on Cat's fit with that team going forward. Just are you mature enough? He's, what is he, 27 or something like that? This is kind of tends to be who you are as a player. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I wonder if you're ever going to figure it out. And Minnesota's cap situation is such that they don't have a lot of time to be messing around with the way that the second Abram rules could mess with their team building here pretty quickly.
I'll say this, for all the stuff that everybody's saying about Rudy. First of all, he's an easy target. He's not all that likable, if we're being perfectly honest. Players around the NBA don't really like him all that much. It's clear that some media members don't like him all that much. They have a 13.1 net rating in the playoffs with Rudy Gobert on the floor. They are minus 7.6 with him off the floor. And you can do that defensively too, right? He is so integral to them offensively because of his screen setting, because of the different space that he can create vertically, because of the lob threat that he can be. Just the little things that he does offensively, that can't be overlooked. But defensively, everybody understands just how impactful he is. Opposing coaches that have to deal with trying to create an offense in hopes of attacking any weak point on Minnesota, they start with Rudy. They're worried about him and the effect that he has on the defensive end of the floor. They've played 13 games so far in the postseason this year. Their defensive rating with him on is 106.9, which would equate to the best defense in the NBA. No duh. With him off, it is like 112. It's a significant difference. And no, he's going to struggle at times on switches. And yeah, he is going to be somebody who at times in the fourth quarter isn't going to be out there on the court because Minnesota wants a little bit more spacing. Minnesota wants a little bit more shooting. And they have an ability to play a little bit smaller, especially if Kyle Anderson can hold up defensively if the series even continues beyond just game 4. But this whole idea that 2 bad moments throughout the course of a playoff series erase what was the most impactful, well, in my case, the second most impactful defense of any player played over an 82-game season, because I put him second on my ballot. That's just ridiculous. Like, we do this all the time. We pretend that, like, small sample sizes or what happens in the postseason negates or devalues what happens throughout the course of an 82-game regular season when it comes to awards specifically. And awards specifically are regular season awards. That's the way that they're voted on. And to me, Rudy was the second most impactful defensive player of anybody in the NBA over an 82-game season. That level of consistency, that level of attention to detail, that level of night-to-night impact, possession-to-possession impact, that doesn't change because he couldn't guard Luka in an end-of-game situation. That doesn't change because sometimes in the playoffs, teams are going to go switch heavy on defense, and he's not going to be able to guard out on the perimeter. Like, the one chink in his armor at this point as a defensive player is the thing that you're going to focus on, as opposed to all the other things that he does on a possession-to-possession basis, or all the things that he can do on a possession-to-possession basis. You're just choosing to miss his impact.
And by the way, he's still pretty good at that thing. Like, Rudy's good on switches. It's just like it's Luka. It's Luka, and you can say that, like, you can't give up a 3 in that situation. He knew that. Just Luka made a really good move.
Right.
He had it was like his 3rd or 4th move. Like, most big men in that situation, Luka doesn't need a move. He's just going past him. You know, like, so it's not even like Rudy defensively. I think he's stamped. We don't need to talk about that anymore. Like, the 4-time defensive player of the year, it does feel like it's weird for that kind of player to have never gotten to a conference finals. But, like, it's not because, like, he's still, even if you look at the playoff numbers, his teams are still a Grand Canyon sized gap between how good they are when he's on the court and off the court. And that's true for this Timberwolves teams too. And this is one of the best defense. This is the best defense in the league. And he's not the only reason, but he's the biggest reason.
And to your point about the Luka thing, everybody knows that Luka wants to go step back to his left off the dribble, right? Rudy took that away. He knew that too. He didn't let Luka go step back to his left. He forced Luka to go step back to his right, which was a slick move, and it was a gutsy shot in a big moment. And, you know, as we put together the career highlight reel of Luka, that's going to be on there, and everything that he said to Rudy after that is going to be on there too. But, like, sometimes, well, majority of the time, great offense is going to beat great defense. It's just the way it goes.
And I think that is a great segue into our newest kind of segment for the podcast, especially during the off season. We're going to do a sort of exit interview type of series where we go through the players for the Cavs. And we're talking about a guy on this episode that had a great regular season, who has been labeled soft in the past, has been unliked maybe by media or whatever, depending on how you look at stuff because of how he's been portrayed. But Jarrett Allen, he is one of those guys that has played his butt off for the Cavs. 77 straight games in the regular season after missing the first 5, and then played in 4 games in the playoffs for 81 straight games during the 2023-24 season. Then you think about he gets now it's justified as a broken rib or a pierced rib, and the narrative still didn't change because there are not only players, as in Marcus Morris Sr., who were surprised that Jarrett Allen didn't play in the end of season series against the Boston Celtics, or there are people who think that he could have done more to get back and be healthy. But that's not the conversation we're having. We're going to talk about Jarrett Allen's impact, why we think he should, could, or might not be on this team going forward. And Chris, I wanted to start with you because I know you're a numbers guy. So I pulled up these on-off court stats for Jarrett Allen. On-court net rating, he was 4th on the Cavs this season with 4.8. He's only behind Dean Wade, Donovan Mitchell, and Max Strus. Off-court, this also tallies guys that are have not played that much. So let's say guys that were on the original roster when this team was being constructed and also played more than 50 games a season. He's 3rd on this list with minus 0.8 when he's off the court for the Cavs. So that's just behind Donovan Mitchell and Max Strus. So what do you think about Jarrett Allen's performance this season? How valuable he was? J.B. Bickerstaff talked at length about how he could go to sleep at night knowing that Jarrett Allen was going to be in the lineup the next day. So just what do you think about everything that's being said about Jarrett after the season that he had?
Well, look, guys, I think you can make numbers say whatever you want, but I think the numbers back up his impact. I think he is one of the most important players that the Cavs have. I think he is one of the most indispensable players. They are a different team at both ends of the floor when he's not out there. The thing that makes their defense so unique is the fact that they've got 2 elite rim protectors, 2 all defensive player of the year type guys. When you take one of those guys out, it's a little bit different. But it's more noticeable, I think, when Jarrett is out as opposed to when Evan is out. When Evan was out throughout the course of this year, he missed a long stretch of the season. Jarrett was able to anchor the paint. Jarrett was able to still be the impactful defensive player that the Cavs believe he can be on a night-to-night basis, on a possession-to-possession basis. In fact, I put Jarrett Allen on my second team all defense. I might have been the only one in the league that voted that way, but I thought he deserved it for the way that he held things down defensively for the Cavs during that stretch without Evan and the consistency that he had even when Evan was out there. So he is really, really important to everything that the Cavs have done over the past couple of years. And the way that JB decided to construct the defense, help the helper, no middle defense, it was a lot predicated based on the personnel that he had and based on the trust that he had in Jarrett and the trust that he had in Evan. So I just think every time that Jarrett is out for a consistent period of time, the Cavs feel that. They feel it at both ends of the floor. The reason why, well, there are 2 reasons to me why there's any kind of conversation about Jarrett and no longer being on this team beyond this year. And it's not about the fact that there were grumbles in the locker room and there are players that were wondering whether Jarrett could have done more. I think that's a heat of the moment type thing. I think that's an emotional thing because you're in the middle of a playoff series and you want to give your best shot to a team and you're not able to because you don't have a really, really important player. I think emotions were really, really raw at the time. Because everybody wanted Jarrett to be out there, Jarrett included. He was doing everything that he could do behind the scenes to try and see if he could give it a go. It is an injury, whether it's a bruised rib, whether it's a pierced rib, whether it's a broken rib, it is an injury that takes weeks to recover from. It becomes months if you're talking about a broken rib or a fractured rib. But it is something that takes weeks. And that's that's not to get on the basketball floor and be effective. That's to be healthy enough, safe enough, protected enough, healed enough to actually go about day-to-day stuff, right? We're talking about playing physical playoff level basketball through that, where you have to reach up above your head on basically every single possession because of the responsibilities that you have. When you have to set more than 100 screens a night because of the responsibilities that you have on offense, there just wasn't a way for Jarrett to play through that injury and be effective for the Cavs. Um, but there are two reasons why I think we're having this conversation about Jarrett and his future. Number one, Evan Mobley's still here, and the Cavs believe and the Cavs know that Evan's evolution is becoming a full-time five at some point. And I think you saw a flash of that throughout the course of the time that Jarrett missed over those final 8 playoff games of Evan playing full-time five, and what that means for the Cavs potentially and what that means for Evan potentially. You know, a lot of people will talk about Victor Wembanyama and the way that he took off the minute that he switched to full-time five as opposed to out of position power forward. Same thing with Chet Holmgren. Has it been holding Evan Mobley back from reaching his ceiling offensively and defensively that he's been playing the power forward spot? That he's been using space on the floor that is also occupied by somebody else that shares the floor with him for a majority of the game. It's something that the Cavs have to evaluate. It's something that the Cavs have to ask themselves. And the other reason is because Jarrett is valuable around the NBA. And if you're going to make a trade to shake up your roster or reconfigure the look of your roster, you're going to have to give up something of value in order to get something of great value back in return. And Jarrett would be that something of value. His contract is appealing. His age and upside, that's appealing. His impact on winning to an opposing executive, that's appealing. His low maintenance persona is appealing. All those different things, beyond the fact that he's also been an all-star in the past and he's one of the best centers in the Eastern Conference. All those things makes him a really, really valuable trade commodity that if the Cavs are going to make a move that significantly changes the look of this team, to me, he's the linchpin of all that.
Yeah, I think Jarrett Allen just played the best basketball of his career this season. Set a new career high in scoring. The development of his little push shot floaters, I think that's like if Jarrett Allen is going to remain on the Cavs, that is so important. I mean, that's important generally, but if the Cavs are going to try to make this thing work with him and Evan Mobley, both of them need to be able to find ways to score without being at the rim and score with when Donovan and Darius get trapped and you become the outlet guy on these traps, you're going to catch the ball, make a dribble, and there are going to be people looking at you at the rim if you're sharing, people looking at you from under the rim if you are sharing the court with another big. So you got to be able to sometimes just shoot that little floater over him. And Jarrett did he was shooting that thing with confidence. He was shooting it off. He was shooting it in the playoffs. He was making that thing. That's really important for his offensive development going forward, particularly if he stays on this team. He also averaged a full assist more than he ever had in his career, which speaks to how much JB Bickerstaff was trusting him in that role and kind of had to at times because, again, Evan Mobley missed a lot of time during the regular season, missed over a month with the knee recovery from surgery. So that's like, I just think that Jarrett Allen was given a bigger offensive burden than he has ever really been given in his career before this year. And he made the most of it with flying colors. To the point about his defensive impact, he's not a high shot block guy, but he is an elite rim protector, and he's an elite rim protector who doesn't foul. Like for his career, 2 fouls per game. This year, it was 1.9. And in the playoffs, 2 fouls a game this year. Only, I understand small sample size there, but like that was an Orlando team who liked to run its head into the wall trying to get to the rim. Like you're going to bang around a little bit. And he was able to keep his hands up. That's really, really important and rare to find a great rim protector who doesn't foul like that. So yeah, I mean, the exit interview is, from me, is Jarrett Allen did a great job this season. It's just he finds himself in an unfortunate situation with the franchise right now because I thought Kobe Altman said something really interesting during the end of season press, I guess his own exit interview last week, and he said that he thought that the Cavs I think he said got away from their job of maximizing Evan Mobley, trying to get the most out of him. And I think that it's kind of hard to get the most out of Evan Mobley's development when you're playing him next to another five. It was originally, I think, a good idea for the Cavs to pair him with another rim protecting big because maybe Evan's body wasn't ready for the consistent punishment that big men's bodies take. But again, to Chris's point about Victor Wembanyama, I don't know, sometimes you can learn a lot just by being thrown into the fire. And as we get deeper into Evan's development, I think he showed Boston's not a great example. They don't have a big man who's going to punish you in the post. I wouldn't say Orlando is a great example either, but he did fine against those teams. And increasingly, there's one Joel Embiid, there's one Nikola Jokic. Now, to get to where you want to go as a franchise, you might have to run into those guys eventually. But there are not that many guys who make you shudder from a post play standpoint as big men. And even when you do see those guys, you're only going to find out by seeing what he can do in those situations. So Jarrett Allen's a really good basketball player that I think 23 teams would be sign me up for that guy. I'll give you a first round pick and a useful player. I think of the Oklahoma City Thunder. They could really use a legit five, or a guy who can rebound, a guy who can protect the rim with a little bit more oomph next to Chet. Again, eventually I think they might run into the same thing that the Cavs have with Mobley, but that's a team that I would think of. And
Golden State, New Orleans.
State. Yep. He's a plug and play guy. Jarrett Allen fits in any culture. He fits in basically any scheme. Ring running big who can protect the rim the way he does. There's no one who doesn't have space for that, right? So I think he had a great year, and I think he's a really good player who's getting better in tangible ways that we can point out on the stat sheet and with our eyes. He's just in a tough spot.
I think the next portion of this that we have to get into is when we talked about the defense. It was built by J.B. Bickerstaff, who is a defensive-minded coach. I remember asking J.B. Bickerstaff in his last interview as the Cavs coach, what are you guys going to do about Evan Mobley potentially being the five? And he said, we have Jarrett Allen. Well, now JB is not here to say that, so it's a whole different conversation. We've talked about Kobe Altman, like you said, Jimmy, saying that they need to continue to develop Evan. Maybe that is them moving him to the five. But the conversation then goes to what we have talked about since JB's dismissal, is the offensive-minded coach that we might think that they're going to bring in to counteract the shortcomings on the offensive end that they had this past season, and how much that might impact whether Jarrett gets to stay or not because of what they want to continue to bring on that level, on that end of the floor, and if Jarrett Allen fits into that description. Chris, it looked like you had something you wanted to say.
This becomes the problem. And look, maybe the Cavs are looking at this situation and they're saying, hey, what can another coach do with X, Y, and Z, right? That's why you move on from one coach and you go to the next, because you feel like the roster is good enough, talented enough, and somebody else needs to maximize combinations or 5-man lineups or whatever the case may be. The truth is, the Cavs offense is going to continue to have a ceiling as long as Evan Mobley is not as comfortable as he would need to be out on the perimeter consistently. Evan Mobley is still at his best at the dunker spot, Evan Mobley is still at his best on the short roll. Evan Mobley is still at his best from the elbow in. That's where he is going to be at his best, and that's where it's going to look best for the Cavs because of the comfort that Evan has at that spot on the floor. And it's the same thing with Jarrett. So it just becomes congested. It just becomes limited. And there's only so much play design. There's only so much scheme around. There's only so much that you can do from an X's and O's standpoint when two of your most important players, two of your high minute players occupy the same space on the floor. Like, they're too similar in terms of their comfort areas. They're too similar in terms of their skill sets. It works with Rudy and Cat because Cat is arguably the best shooting big man of the last 10 years. So he's not playing in the same position or the same spots on the floor where Rudy is most comfortable. It works in Dallas because you've got the one rim runner, the one lob threat on the court at all. They're not playing Gafford and Lively at the same time, right? They're playing Gafford with PJ Washington, or they're going to play Lively with Maxi Kleber or whatever. Like, you just need to find a different way in terms of where these guys are going to be positioned. And you can't do that if Evan is not going to be consistently comfortable out on the perimeter as a spacer, as a perimeter offensive threat, as a guy who can initiate offense from those spots. So I agree that JB didn't get the most out of those two guys together, but you can find the smartest coach in the NBA, and I think they're going to struggle with that in terms of creating a high enough offensive ceiling for the Cavs to get to the place that they want to get to offensively. This year, with both those guys on the floor together, the Cavs had an offensive rating right around 110. It's just stylistically, they're too similar. And the way to remedy it potentially moving forward is Evan evolves in a different kind of way than what he has to this point in his career. That Evan becomes a consistent, reliable outside shooter, three-point shooter, threat from there. And he just becomes more comfortable out on the perimeter, so he's not taking up the same space, or he's not using the same space on the floor that Jarrett's going to want to use. But I just think they're too similar stylistically that eventually the Cavs are going to have to make a decision.
Yeah, like how much patience do you have for Evan Mobley's jump shot is the core question there, honestly. If you want to keep this core together, how long are you willing to wait? And what happens if it never comes? That's a realistic possibility. I mean, Evan Mobley, I think we're doing backflips if Evan Mobley gets to 35% from three on pick a low number of three attempts per game. Like, the Cavs are doing backflips if he gets there. He's not there yet. He's shown flashes. He hits a couple here, a couple there. And in the Orlando series, then he doesn't take one for the last 4 games. Now, granted, Jarrett wasn't there for the last 3 of those games, so he didn't. The emphasis wasn't there as much. But like, you see the point. And Jarrett might end up being a victim of his own injury here, because the Cavs, when he was not playing in the Boston series, like, oh, look what we found here with Evan Mobley. This guy's, look, we've got a little more room to operate out there. The face-up game looks a little bit better. He's blowing past guys off the dribble. Right. Granted, again, dribbling past Al Horford and Luke Cornett, not exactly showing me where your weight is at. But still, like, that was one part of the vision for Evan Mobley. This guy he is agile. He's an agile big man. He's a skilled big man. He can do this stuff off the dribble. He can create advantages, force help with the ball in his hands. That was part of the original draft vision. And then Jarrett Allen misses a couple weeks, and you're already starting to see it. So I think the Cavs front office might be thinking, well, what if we gave this guy 80 games to do that? Like, what could he show us then? Which, again, is not Jarrett's fault. Jarrett's still a really good player. It's just a tricky fit, which is kind of what we've known from the outset. And the Cavs tried to lean all the way into defense to tilt the scales in their favor a little bit, and it just hasn't quite worked in their favor.
And look, JB tried splitting them up. I mean, if you think about it, he kept taking Evan Mobley off the floor his first rotation. He kept taking him off the floor around the 7-minute mark. And then Jarrett would play until about the 3-minute mark or the 2-minute mark. And then Evan would go back out there. And then it would be Evan alone at the 5, surrounded by whoever else it was. It was usually Donovan Mitchell, Jarrett Allen together, and Evan Mobley, Darius Garland together. And then, like, the only times that they would consistently play together where their minutes would be matched would be at the beginning of the game, sometimes at the end of the game, at the end of the second quarter. So he was trying to split them up and stagger them as much as possible and give Jarrett a little bit of freedom to operate as the sole 5-man, and give Evan freedom to operate as the sole 5-man or the sole big, however you want to phrase it. But when you're talking about like roster construction and you're talking about all of the finances that you have allocated to certain guys, 2 of your top 4 highest paid players in the future are essentially going to play the same spot. Like, that's tough.
Yeah, and I think that gets into what I was about to say, Chris. Like, if you think about, if the listeners are asking, well, what do you think about when Jarrett Allen was out there by himself with Evan Mobley injured, and the Cavs went on that run that was unprecedented because you lost Darius Garland and Evan Mobley? Well, the Cavs have almost, I don't want to say certainly, but like, it's almost pretty clear that they've attached themselves to Evan Mobley and wanted to make him get to the next level. So they would rather see him do that and then have Jarrett Allen on the same court and be able to see him do that in the next couple of seasons, because we all understand there's a different ceiling when it comes to offensive production for Evan Mobley than there is for Jarrett Allen. But I wanted to get into why we think that Jarrett Allen is such a high trade piece. Like you said, Chris, there's a lot of intangibles that he has, but what could the Cavs get back if they decide to if they decide to stick with Darius and just trade Jarrett Allen? How much do you think the Cavs would be able to get back? Jimmy already said his little pick. He said a first-round draft pick and somebody that's relevant. Chris, where is your head at in that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only reason that the Cavs would even acquire a first-round pick is that they would potentially be able to use it as trade ammunition. So maybe it's not the player that you want back in return for somebody like Jarrett, but it's an asset that you would get back that you could then use to package together with something else to get the player that ultimately you want. But I don't know, like Jarrett Allen for Andrew Wiggins, like that's the framework of a deal that I think both sides would at least discuss. You would have to find other pieces that mix in there, right? So the way that I view Jarrett, and I don't know exactly what the Cavs would get, but the way that I view him is that he's a legitimate centerpiece of a deal. He's not a throw-in guy. He's not a salary aggregator. He's not a sweetener of a deal. To me, he is the centerpiece of a deal that a team would want. New Orleans is a team that has been interested in Jarrett Allen for years. They have made multiple calls to the Cavs on multiple occasions to try and get Jarrett. The Cavs weren't interested at that time. Has something changed enough for both sides that you could start having some kind of conversation about a framework of Brandon Ingram and Jarrett Allen? And what else could that get you? What else would the Cavs have to give up in something along those lines? So I don't know. I mean, I think if the Cavs are willing to even listen when it comes to Jarrett, it better be so that they can address, another roster weak point. And to me, like if you're trying to rejigger the roster, then you're moving Evan to full-time 5, right? You're trying to figure out what you can do to add a stretch power forward to that mix. So maybe you look for somebody like that, or you look for a two-way wing that can start at the 3 and move Max Strus to the 2. Something along those lines. It's just about reconfiguring the roster so that there's not as much in terms of imbalance. But I mentioned on a previous podcast, if I'm the Cavs, the guys that I have my eye on are two-way wings that can play the 3 or the 4 spot, that can shoot from the outside, that can space the floor. Mikal Bridges for the Brooklyn Nets, Cam Johnson for the Brooklyn Nets, Kevin Durant, if Phoenix is willing to even consider that, given that both owners hate each other's guts. Um, you know, Obviously Paul George is somebody that the Cavs should have an interest in. Jimmy Butler is somebody that they should be paying attention to. Andrew Wiggins, like I said, Devin Vassell for the San Antonio Spurs. That doesn't make sense for a framework of a Jarrett Allen deal. That's more of a Darius Garland deal. But that type of player is the one, OG Anunoby of the New York Knicks, if they can't figure something out with him. That is the type of player that the Cavs should be keeping an eye on. That's the kind of price tag that I think they should be holding above Jarrett Allen. Like, if you want this guy, if you want one of the best centers in the NBA, that can raise your offensive level because of all the things that he does at that end of the floor, that can give you a legitimate anchor on the defensive end of the floor, that can also switch onto smaller guys on the perimeter, and he can play in today's era. And he got better as a rebounder, and he got better in terms of his strength and his physicality this year. Like, is that the kind of player that you want X team out there? Then this is the price tag. And I think the Cavs should set a high price tag, and I think they should target a two-way wing that can play the 3 or the 4 spot, because that is the most valuable commodity in today's NBA. That is the hardest thing to find. That is something that the Cavs have been searching for. They've used many, many resources to try and fix that problem. And I think Jarrett could be their pathway to doing it.
Yeah, I think I like what the kind of teams that Chris has in mind. Your Golden States, your New Orleans is I don't know how to say New Orleans with an S. Oklahoma City, I already said. These teams where there's a log jam. They have a lot of useful players. So, and I guess in New Orleans and Oklahoma City's case, they also have a lot of picks. Yeah. So I think they're more likely to part with some of their more useful pieces just because some of these things might not already be in their plans. And when we start talking about, like, your Paul George's, Brandon Ingram's, even your OG Anunobys, I think that's where we start talking about the Cavs having to attach something to Jarrett Allen, which could be where these picks come in handy. Mm-hmm. And I also wonder a little bit. Jarrett Allen's a really good player, but he's the center position's pretty deep in terms of, like, the mean center in the NBA is pretty good. You know what I mean? There's like 10 to 15 rim running, rim protecting centers in the NBA. So if I would say to the Cavs, if they're shopping Jarrett Allen for a pretty penny, get your sales shoes on, because I think you can make the case that Jarrett Allen is worth a higher price than, I'm trying to think of your average rim running, rim protecting, like Daniel Gafford, honestly, is a good example. Mm-hmm. Definitely, I think he's worth more than Daniel Gafford. But if I'm a team that's trying to finesse you in a trade, I'm going to say, is he that different from Daniel Gafford? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Jarrett Allen's extremely valuable, and I think we've talked about how the Cavs might have needed to do some repairing of a relationship, because one, they didn't really have the best end out of the season, but two, Jarrett Allen still, I had to check again today, Chris, because a subtexter sent it out. They said, is Jarrett Allen still not following the Cavs back on Instagram? So I checked that. He is not.
I don't think he ever was.
I think that's the next thing I was going to say. Is I don't know if he ever was, because he might follow his teammates, but he might not follow the board. But I don't know. That's something that's up in the air. We don't know before when it was asked. But yeah, and Jarrett's just such a nice guy, but also, like, hands-off social media person that you can't never take any of that without a grain of salt, because you don't know what he's got going on in his head. Like, you haven't seen Darius Garland active on social media after the season either. So whatever. But
neither of these guys are LeBron, like sending, like tweeting fit in or fit out during the Kevin Love. This is not who these guys are. All right, like we don't need to take the social stuff that serious. We're talking about guys as low key as Jarrett Allen and Darius Garland.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was gonna say. But Donovan Mitchell on the other, no, I'm just kidding. He just tweets for fun. Donovan Mitchell's tweeted about the Guardians and stuff. That's always just fun.
When Donovan Mitchell stops tweeting, let him know. Be concerned.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say. That's all we gotta worry about with Don.
Unless he's injured, because you know that's his telltale sign.
Either way, cause for concern. Either way.
Fair enough. Chris, do you think we hit on everything that you wanted to talk about when it comes to Jarrett Allen for his quote-unquote exit interview on the Wine and Gold Talk podcast?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think those are the key points. The Cavs asked him to work on various aspects of his game, and he came back a better player after, a pretty pedestrian playoff series against the Knicks. They wanted him to get stronger and more physical, and he was. He became one of the league leaders in rebounds, and he showed that he could hang with some of the bigger, burlier, stronger centers that he matched up against. And he anchored the paint by himself for about 6 weeks while Evan Mobley was recovering from knee surgery. And they also wanted him to improve his passing, and they wanted him to improve his face-up game. And I think you saw evidence of all that. So that's the other thing that I don't think people should discount when it comes to Jarrett, is that, there's this belief that Evan has a higher ceiling, and rightfully so. Like, you can squint and you can see the vision for Evan. His floor already is one of the most impactful defensive players in the entire NBA. And then you start thinking about, okay, what could that be combined with more of a polished offensive game, a go-to move, a game that can extend out to the perimeter, somebody who can be a playmaker, somebody who can be an offensive hub. And you start to get really, really excited about the future of Evan Mobley. But it's like, Jarrett can get better too. And he showed evidence of that from last year to this year. So I wouldn't just sit here and dismiss the idea that Jarrett continues to evolve as a player, right? And that there's still some untapped potential within Jarrett. And if it's not the Cavs that are able to tap into that eventually, then I think some other team will give him an opportunity to do that. He's still only 26 years old. He's just now entering the prime of his career. And there are reasons to believe, and there's evidence that says he has gotten better and he can continue to get better. So I wouldn't dismiss that idea either. And that's one of the reasons why I think it would be risky for the Cavs to move on. I've talked about the challenges of him and Evan together. While admitting those things, I also think that you have to admit that it is extremely risky for the Cavs to move on from such a reliable, integral piece of everything that they have done over the last couple of years. But that's why Kobe Altman gets paid the big bucks, to make those difficult franchise-changing decisions that can take you higher, but they could also push you lower.
Another thing in Jarrett's, to Jarrett's credit, in the comparing him to Evan situation, he's gonna be cheaper. Evan Mobley is probably going to command a max rookie extension. Jarrett Allen is going to need to get paid like a starting center and then some, but two different levels of financial investment there. But there's a reason for that, right?
Right.
Evan Mobley, I think Jarrett Allen can get better, but on the margins, he can take small steps forward. He's already really good. He's probably never going to be like a franchise-changing player.
Right.
Evan Mobley, the best version of Evan Mobley, could be a completely different player than the guy that we have seen so far in his career, which is why I would bet, and I'm going to write this week, that the Cavs will probably pick Mobley over Allen if they do come to the conclusion that it's time to break that group up. I would also say one more piece of unwarranted advice that Kobe Altman doesn't want from me. If you could trade him to a Western Conference team, just because an Eastern Conference team is going to say, "Hey, we're trying to beat the Knicks eventually." So I don't know. That film's still out there, and I know that we've talked about the Knicks are a different. Like the Knicks were killing Joel Embiid on the glass. Like to a certain extent, there's nothing you can do. But I don't know. It's an easier pitch to someone that may not have to play Mitchell Robinson 7 times in a playoff series than not.
That was exactly how I was going to end today's podcast, Jimmy. I don't know if the Cavs want to play against Jarrett Allen. Like, sure, he's a great, fun-loving guy, but when he gets after it, he's, like we've talked about, a great rim protector, somebody that's hard to go against, and I don't know. But I think we got into everything that we want to talk about in today's exit interview of Jarrett Allen. Stay tuned for more of these. It's going to become a series as we get into all of the different players. And maybe you'll get to see us lump together different guys when we talk about what went on this past season and what could be the future for this Cavs team. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.